So I've lived through a lot of things where people have said this is just going to destroy the neighborhood, it's going to destroy the city, and it doesn't pan out. Turns out that change, even radical change, comes so slowly. And so, I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot this year as people predict doom and gloom over the Public Safety Charter Amendment.
What we need to be focusing on again is like, where do we want to go? and what is it actually going to take to get there? And keeping what we have now is not going to get us there. So I think the doom and gloom is a bunch of hyperbole. We need to be thoughtful in how we move forward on this, for sure.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
I like what you've done with your background. I'm glad you took my advice to spice up your background, because I've watched some of the candidate forums and it's just you and a blank wall, and it's very sad.
I know. Well, it's because I live in an attic.
Right.
I'm literally sitting on the floor right now.
Oh, it's
because
the slope.
This is the slope of the wall starts at like 3.5 feet up.
And yeah, everything would fall off the wall, right?
Exactly. Or to be hanging at like this angle yeah.
Well, thank you for making an effort. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I try.
Okay. This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. And my guest today is Katie Jones, who's running for City Council, Minneapolis City Council in Ward 10. She's also a Wedge resident. Ward 10 encompasses the Wedge. So welcome to the show, Katie.
Thank you, John. It's great being here.
Okay. Let's start with why you're running for office. It's been a very difficult time in Minneapolis over the last 15 or so months. And as a Wedge resident and a Ward 10 voter, I was worried coming into this election year we would be stuck with some not so great candidates, and we definitely have some of those. But I was worried nobody that I could vote for and feel good supporting would run. It's not a fun time to be an elected official. So why disrupt your life and jump in and do this and give people somebody worth voting for?
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, it comes down to when I moved here, my neighbors welcomed me and opened doors for me. And, those doors were a part of the neighborhood association board. And from there, I got to meet you and so many other good folks. And it just showed me what civic engagement could be and how we could have an impact on our community. And really, I've just want to build a community where everyone knows they belong. And I think my skill sets as just a very practical engineering type person and my, experience with City Hall and working on a number of advisory committees, I want to just bring that to the table to serve my neighbors in the most practical way possible.
You talk about being an engineer, and the times when I have noticed you're an engineer is when you don't laugh at my jokes. I don't think you get my sense of humor. That's what I've come to know about Katie Jones over the years. Doesn't appreciate Wedge Live or my sense of humor.
That's not totally true.
I think it's true.
I don't know. I like bitter humor. I don't know. It's
Am I bitter? Am I bitter?
Maybe in a slightly different way. I don't know. It's usually humor that's usually at my husband's expense is the humor that I find the funniest.
Okay. We won't be making fun of Peter today. So what is your big agenda if you win? What are you trying to do?
Yeah, so my North Stars are really equity and sustainability. And under that, I have 5 main areas that I'm really focusing on. The first is public safety. And I know that this has been talked about ad nauseum. I am for the Yes for Minneapolis campaign. I think we need to create a public safety department that answers to the council. We've had the same tool under the mayor for the last 150 years. It's clear that it's not working. And so if something's broken, we should do something about it. We need change. And this is a very practical step to create a public safety department. We need responders for mental health, substance abuse, property crime, homelessness, all of these things that don't necessitate an armed response. And, beyond that, beyond, the foundation of public safety, we need another foundational piece, which is affordable housing. There's unfortunately not going to be a silver bullet for that, but there's a lot of, silver buckshot, as people like to say. We've had 50,000 people move here in the last 10 years. That's only going to continue. We're an attractive place. We have water, we have resources, we have good jobs, and especially, with how the climate is changing, more and more people are going to want to come here. So we need to continue expanding our housing options. That means everything from like the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit, like I'm building, to apartment buildings, to different ownership opportunities with condos and other types of buildings. And thinking about how we can make it easier for people to live in different arrangements. I'm excited about the new SRO legalization, but I don't think that it goes far enough. We need to make sure that make it easier for people to live in our city. Third, we really need to look at our transportation options. When it comes to equity and accessibility, not everyone can use a private vehicle. And so having the option to walk, bike, roll, or take transit are going to be really important, not only for those things, but for climate. And that's something that I've been working on for the last 10 years. I've been working in sustainability, actually worked in the sustainability office in City Hall. And it's just clear that climate change is upon us and we need to decarbonize when it comes to buildings and when it comes to transportation. And I've got a lot of nerdy details that I'm happy to dive into. And then last but not least, we need to be supporting our small businesses. I'm the daughter of a whole line of entrepreneurs and small business owners. And, Peter and I, we own a triplex and a duplex. So we're kind of small business owners ourselves. And, if Lake Street or Nicollet or Hennepin Avenue, any of those, if our small businesses don't thrive there, that's not only painful for us, but it's painful for everyone in the community. And so I want to make sure that we're providing the supports for our small business owners, specifically targeting BIPOC entrepreneurs. So those are the things that I'm focusing on, all under this lens of creating a community where everyone knows they belong.
I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier, the silver buckshot. You say people use that phrase. I don't think I've heard anyone use that phrase. So
I will, give the caveat that I'm from rural Indiana, and
not the Wedge.
Some of the phrases I use may be unfamiliar to people in Minneapolis.
I've been around the country. I've been around. I've never heard it. So here's a gotcha question, and I have the mailer right here, and you can hear it because I'm shaking it. Do you support the chief? Do you support the chief? Do you support the chief?
So I think, again, that it's important that we have a holistic public safety department. And if the chief can make sure that he's holding our officers accountable, then I would support that. I struggle right now to see evidence that he has been doing that. Particularly the article that just came out in the Reformer about Jaleel and how over the past year, it's been a year since Jaleel was attacked by MPD, and there's a lot of nuance in that story. But at the end of the day, there was excessive force used, and the officers have not been held accountable, at least to the public's knowledge. And that is something that needs to change. It is really hard to have trust in our public safety system if we're not when we're seeing officers abuse their power in that way and then not be held accountable. That has to change.
Yeah, I'm extremely frustrated that this election year is somehow getting away from the whole point, the reason I think we're all here, public safety, It should be about public safety, but it's turning into they're trying to turn it into a referendum on the chief. I don't know if it's because the mayor knows he is deeply unpopular and he needs a front man. I don't know. I'm frustrated with the just losing track of what this should really be all about. Have you been frustrated as you have conversations with voters across Ward 10 that we seem to have lost track of what this is all about?
And the thing that frustrates me the most is honestly some of the terminology. And some of the terminology it's been needed in order to wake people up to the fact that our public safety system has not been working. But defund has unfortunately put a lot of people in this kind of loss aversion mindset. And so that triggers them. And then they are automatically, well, we need to protect the system that we have. And they then suddenly tune out to any potential other reality. And that really worries me, because when I am talking to folks and we do break through and we talk about how we need responders, the appropriate responders for the right situations, everyone agrees with that. Everyone agrees that we need mental health responders and responders for substance abuse, property crime, homelessness. That makes sense to so many people, but it gets lost because it's this zero-sum game. And I think that's just the wrong framing. We need to be asking, do we have the right tools to bring us public safety? Not how many officers do we need? That is just absolutely the wrong framing.
Yeah. And the risk, it seems to me the risk is in the existing system that hasn't been dismantled. It was left in place. It was provided with funding, and it has been falling apart for the last 15 months. The system we have is the risk. Not changing it seems it's the risk. The risk is not doing something different, because this is going to happen again.
Mm-hmm. Yep, 100%. And I would also say to that we think that the status quo is the safe option, and really, I mean, it is a choice to keep the status quo. And I would rather make a choice for something that we know could possibly be better, as opposed to keeping the status quo and knowing how it currently operates. And
so is the public safety, I saw this on a anonymous attack flyer in South Uptown last night. Is the Public Safety Charter Amendment a Trojan horse for abolishing the police? If it passes, I've heard it said, I think it was in that lawsuit that Don Samuels has lodged against the city, that October 2nd, was it October? No, December 2nd, no more police if the Public Safety Charter Amendment passes. Is that what's happening?
That is not what's happening. I've talked to hundreds of voters throughout the ward, and if I get the pleasure of being elected for Ward 10, and this public safety amendment passes, on January 1, we will still have police. That will not change. And I think, again, as an engineer, I think in very linear and practical terms about how do we implement things. I mean, I've implemented policy within the city of Minneapolis already. And knowing that we have to think through all the potential cases and scenarios before we make change is really, really important. And so I don't see change immediately happening on, January 1, 2022. I think we will be having conversations around what does this public safety department look like? Who is going to be the department head of that? What qualifications and skills do we want underneath that? And then what are the responders that we want as a part of that public safety department too? The idea that just because we define a new department in our charter means that things have to happen like that. That's not reality. We over and over again, we create policy, and then we have inaction dates. And those are things that we need to set up. But I will also say that Minneapolis is not going to be a guinea pig in creating a public safety department. There are public safety departments in cities throughout the state of Minnesota, there's actually a public safety department at the state level. And so it's not like we're going out on a limb here and creating something new. And actually, there are more cities moving in this direction. I actually got read an article the other day that Hennepin County is providing social workers to 20 more cities in Hennepin County, because cities are wanting to add those responders to their public safety systems. And so that's basically what Minneapolis is wanting to do too. The unfortunate part is that the council has very little control in being able to add that to a holistic system of public safety. Right now, the council has no jurisdiction over the police, and they can add things like the Office of Violence Prevention, but that again is separate from the police. To me, I would ask the question, why would we want those two pieces separate from one another? We should be coordinating and thinking about our policies in a holistic manner, as opposed to council creating their own departments and the police being underneath the mayor and operating on their own silo. That doesn't make sense. We need to be coordinating across the city and underneath the public safety department. Sorry,
and if yes for Minneapolis passes, that is a mandate that you had better fund this department. You would better fund these alternatives to law enforcement. It's not, in my eyes, a mandate to abolish the police. It's a mandate to take some money, put your money where your mouth is, and fund this department and these alternative responses. And the flip side of that is, if it doesn't pass, that sends a terrible message about the future and who we're listening to in this city, and who is ascendant for the next 2 to 4 years, potentially with a strong mayor, what gets funded, and who the mayor is beholden to and who he's serving. The stakes feel very high for me, not just the people we're electing, but these charter amendments.
Yeah, and for the city at large. I mean, it's thinking about, Minneapolis, we pride ourselves on being a progressive city, but really this is the big test. We need to put our proverbial money where our mouth is, or I guess our votes where our mouths are, and make sure that we are creating the change in order to serve those folks who are most vulnerable in our communities. And that means providing the right responders at the right times when people are calling for help. And a lot of times that isn't a police officer, and a police officer may indeed escalate a situation. I've talked to a number of voters who say that, they haven't had the greatest kind of customer service when it comes to police, and that they weren't necessarily the right people that they wanted to come to their aid. And so it's having other options when people are calling for help, I think, is really necessary.
So what are you hearing from people? You're talking to a lot of people. I like to ask candidates what they're hearing from voters, because nobody's talking to more people and hearing more perspectives than candidates this year. So does it make you optimistic, the things you're hearing, or should we all be as depressed as I am about this and feel like the sky is falling? Because I hear a lot of bad arguments. I hear people misinformed, and I worry that a lot of people who were previously unengaged in politics are loosely paying attention to the local news and getting the same 2-minute story night after night, and losing track of the broader picture of how we got here. So,
yeah, that's a good question. And it really runs the gamut of what people are saying. The people who are really keyed into uptown crime and next door are really, really on edge and concerned about crime, and they're ready to leave the city, all the way to the other end where folks, they don't really pay attention to the news, and they go about their daily lives, and they don't even mention public safety when I'm talking to them. And I'll have to mention, so whenever I talk to a voter, I ask them 2 questions. One, what do you like about living here? Because if they like something, we should try to do more of it. And 2, what concerns them about our city? So that gives them an immediate opportunity to voice those concerns. And so, I will say that public safety is the number one thing that people bring up. But on the whole, most people are excited about having a change. They recognize that our current system is not working. Most people are willing to make this change of saying we need a public safety department. And I think a lot of it is people understanding that, especially until like the Second Amendment goes away, we're going to have, weapons in our society, and that we're going to need a police force to be able to deal with violence and especially guns, and how do you, de-escalate those types of situations. And so if we're going to have that, though, we need to have a responsive and a police force that we can hold accountable, and that has a culture of actual care and a good customer service and serving those people in the city of Minneapolis, especially when they're experiencing trauma. They're undergoing undergoing emergencies, right? That's why they're asking for help. And I think in order to change that culture, you can't just say, yes, we need to change the culture, and that needs to happen now. And the chief says you must do these things. That's not how culture changes. You have to change the incentive structure in order to change our behavior. And I actually work in behavior change right now. So in energy efficiency, work in community-based social marketing. If you've read Nudge and a number of different and Persuasion, looking at behavior change science, we know that the incentive structure and how you report to various levels of authority is really important. And what things are made or what information is made public versus not made public is really important for how people conduct their behavior. So I think that's a long way of saying we need structural change in order to get cultural change, so that when people call for help, that they have the type of response that they're expecting and the compassionate and caring response that they need.
Give me some campaign metrics, Katie Jones. How's your campaign going? How much money have you raised? How many volunteers do you have? How many doors have you knocked? Give me those campaign metrics.
I was going to say, that's a lot of numbers I need to go through my head. So,
just estimate.
Amount of funds raised, we've raised over $75,000, and I'm so thankful to everyone who's contributed to our campaign. We're really on track for meeting our goals there. When it comes to volunteers, we've had probably more than 50 volunteers at this point who have helped us in some way, shape, or form. And what was your last metric? Oh, number of doors.
Doors knocked, phone calls made, just whatever numbers you have. Tell me how your campaign's going.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Well, I contact at least 150. I'm on 150 doors at least every week. And then we've got more folks doing that as well. So really what's great is that I have a wonderful campaign team who is keeping track of all of that, so I don't have to use the mental space.
How many people are opening their doors in our coronavirus reality now? How many? I would not open my door for you, I'll be honest.
That's a good question. Usually between 15 and 20% when I go out.
Okay.
So
lots of lonely people out there opening their doors for strangers.
Or they've been pent up with the pandemic for so long, and people don't knock on anyone's door anymore, and they're just curious. And honestly, Ward 10 folks are really, really nice. I'd say 98% of my conversations go really well, and people are happy to talk. So I really appreciate that. Go Ward 10.
That makes me think maybe the denizens of uptown crime don't actually live in Ward 10, if you're telling me people in Ward 10 are nice.
At least that's been my experience, and I've been to all 5 neighborhoods of the ward. So
yeah, maybe you've got one of those faces that makes people treat you nice. I don't know.
I think it's the polka dotted dresses. It really calms people down.
Right, that is your trademark. I've heard that. So, what are you learning about human nature after all this voter contact? When I think about the formative political experience in my life, it's going to way too many neighborhood association meetings, and I will call it a toxic stew. That's what I'll call it. And it changed my outlook on local politics. So I would imagine running for office and talking to just a ton of people from every imaginable perspective, some of them treating you really bad, some of them being really nice, is going to change your outlook on humanity, might change your, how is it changing you to go through this experience? Or what are you learning? What larger wisdom can you impart on us from the experience? Either one.
Yeah, I mean, I was on the neighborhood board for 5 years, and so that gave me a lot of insight, I think, into human nature. One is, people don't like change, or people are scared of change, especially the older that you get. If things have been relatively good in your area and in your lifestyle, again, that loss aversion comes to mind, and so any potential change is a potential loss, or something where something can go badly. And that, well, the other is that, Ward 10 is more than 80% renter. And I know in the Wedge alone, we have 50% turnover every year. And that may not be that people are moving out of the neighborhood, but they're at least moving within, or maybe moving within. And so, we have a lot of fresh faces that are in the neighborhood or in the ward. And it's a lot of folks who are just like, optimistic on life. They come to Uptown because of the vibrancy and just the exciting things that are happening and the proximity to everything. So I would say that something that gives me hope is the number of people who move to this area because of the walkability and bikeability and transit, the accessibility to everything. That just shows to me that is a hunger, especially from younger generations. And it's something actually that is very much appreciated by older generations as well. And to me, that just screams that we need to be creating more, regions of our city that are as accessible as Uptown. Like, in a number of ways, we are very unique in how walkable and bikeable and transit accessible we are. And I think that's a shame. We need more places like this because that makes it more affordable, more equitable. And it makes our city just more attractive for more people. And again, I just come back to why I'm doing this is because I want to create a community where everyone knows they belong. And these are the things that people are asking for. And so it's what I want to deliver.
That's the reason I moved to the Wedge. I decided to move to Minneapolis, and, you look at a map, you go on Google Maps and you look, where's the transit? Where can I bike? Where can I have a grocery store or like half a dozen grocery stores near where I live? And those places do not exist in any kind of abundance. This place in Ward 10 is kind of unique in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not even the U has the accessibility that we do. They don't have the grocery store access or the other types of store access. So I would say, like, in downtown doesn't really have it quite either. So yeah, I think we're very unique in that way. So coming back to weird phrases that I think you might appreciate. So my cross country coach in high school, he used to use the phrase, "You can't swing a dead cat without hitting blah, blah, blah." That is very plethora, there's a plethora of them in an area.
We don't swing dead cats in the Wedge. All our cats are alive and we don't swing them. Put them in the window.
Well, you can't swing a dead cat in the Wedge without hitting a grocery store.
It's true. It is true. I have heard that phrase before. I still am skeptical of the silver buckshot phrase.
Yeah, well, rural Indiana for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'm working my way through the outline here. We've worked ahead and we've covered some things that I wanted to cover. We just kind of worked through those. Let's see what's next.
I have been told that I talk very quickly, so that could be part of it.
It's good for a podcast, talking really quickly. People need to have their minds massaged by fast talkers. That's why they listen to podcasts.
When so my uncle owned a chocolate shop, and I used to work there as a teenager, and he used to scold me because I would talk too quickly to customers. He's like, "You're going to confuse them. They're not going to be able to understand you." It's like, oh, well, there's a reason why I don't work in chocolate shops anymore, I guess.
Let's talk about Strong Mayor. I have spoken with you a little bit off the podcast about Strong Mayor, and you've you told me you've heard from people about it. There are some people who are very into it and they want to know your opinion on it. And it's become not, I don't think it's for a lot of people. I'll let you characterize it though, but some people just feel really strongly about it. How do you feel about it?
So yeah, I've definitely talked to folks who are very, very much in favor of that, and I think they're coming at it from in a number of ways. It makes sense, right? To just have one person who makes the final calls on a number of things, and it can make government more efficient. And as an engineer, I really appreciate efficiency, but my struggle is making sure that all voices are heard, and especially an at-large position, and which is elected in an off year. I mean, just like the rest of council is too, but that is going to have higher turnout of wealthier, whiter homeowner type people. That type of voice is going to be more represented in that at-large position, being the mayor, and so that then leaves out a number of voices that are critical to moving us forward on creating a community where everyone knows they belong. And that's why I'm really in favor of having keeping our structure of a strong council. And there are deficiencies of part of it for sure. I worked in City Hall and have seen some of that, but that doesn't mean we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think one of the things that really solidified my thoughts on this were that a woman who had worked, so she was testifying in front of the Charter Commission. She testified that she had worked in both Minneapolis and St. Paul in the mayor's offices, and realized that Minneapolis was less efficient than St. Paul. But one of the benefits of what Minneapolis, our policy structure, is that we're much more innovative on what we move forward with. And you can see that, right? Minneapolis is more progressive than St. Paul is. And we've moved forward many more, more progressive policies than they have. So I think, and that I think comes from the diversity of our council moving forward those policies and working in tandem with the departments to come up with those. So I think really that coordination and collaboration more so with our departments is how our city government works, which is just different than what I've seen in St. Paul. I've actually done some work in St. Paul on some energy benchmarking policies there, and the development was much different than here.
And that St. Paul employee's name is Trudy Maloney.
Oh, thank you. Better remember.
I talk about her. Well, I talk about that all the time. That's one of the things that stood out to me watching a bunch of Charter Commission meetings. Mm-hmm. Because when people like Barry Clegg, who is the chair of the Charter Commission, talk about a lack of efficiency and, nothing will get done because nobody's in charge. What if the inclination of the person in charge is to do nothing? What happens then? What if we're going to get really efficient at doing absolutely nothing? Very efficient, but nothing happens. So I think it goes back to a risk aversion. Like let's have 13 voices and 13 priorities and hash this out and have people that we elect take the lead on things and actually do stuff. Enough of this trusting one strong man to do the work.
100%.
Don't put your faith in one guy. Especially not this mayor.
Or woman. Or person.
Well, when I say guy, I'm talking about Jacob Fry. Hopefully, I am hoping for a lady mayor. I really am. Let's do that.
Got my support there.
I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about the power struggle? It seems like both the Public Safety Charter Amendment and the Strong Mayor Charter Amendment are about power. Who has the power? People want to make it about the chief. People want to make it about how many cops whether we have cops or not. It's not about those things. It's about who has the power. And I think giving some authority over the police to the city council is about asserting some democratic control here. And the Charter Commission's proposal to go with strong mayor is about removing power from the people who elect the city council and putting it in a mayor who is an office they can more easily buy. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the power dynamics at play, because that's what I think this is really boiling down to, that with these two charter amendments.
Yeah, 100%. I think it is more of a, traditionalists wanting to keep the status quo and prevent change. And the way to do that is to concentrate power and then be able to, assert influence over fewer people, being just one person as opposed to 13 council members. And really, that's less democratic, that's less equitable. And at the end of the day, we need to make sure that all the voices in Minneapolis are being heard, both geographically and racially and to the stage of life and all those types of things. And I think, and I think just from a practical standpoint, I think a lot about capacity and people's capacity to just, go about their daily lives, deal with their family and personal issues, their work issues, their advocacy issues, all of those things. And that it's impossible to embody all of the diversity of thought and experiences within one person, that being the mayor. And so I just don't understand why we would want to, have so much, put all of our eggs in one basket, essentially. When if we are truly wanting to build an equitable city, we wouldn't be putting all those eggs in one basket. We'd be making sure that there is opportunity to bring forth new ideas because of those different lived experiences and views, from different parts of the city. And that's why, I struggle because, when we talk about power dynamics, at the end of the day, I'm a person who likes harmony, and I like to try to find alignment between groups. I think there is always opportunity to find places where we have similar values. I grew up in a very conservative area, and there are still values that I share with folks at home, but they express them in different ways. But it's when we get down to the tactile pieces, I think we can move forward on things. And that's why it pains me, honestly, to talk about those power dynamics in a way, because if we, boil it back up to that high level, if we want equity, it's just so clear that we need to have a more democratic process of how we engage our community and create policy and implement that policy. And that is through, a stronger council instead of a strong mayor system.
Should we get real? Should we get real for a moment on the podcast?
How real are you talking about here, John?
So you've touched on something where I was deeply skeptical of you early in our acquaintanceship, if I can use that word. Both part of the neighborhood organization here in the Wedge. And so we knew each other that way. And I think I probably misinterpreted your desire for harmony and bringing people together as like, well, this person is not trustworthy. How can I trust this person to have my back? She's over with the terrible people, talking it out with them. And so I have since come to trust you a lot and trust your judgment and understand that you are trying to work through those differences. But, eventually you got to come down on a side and people will call you names and be very mean to you. And there's people running for office will talk about the people. I'm going to listen to the people. I'm the candidate who will listen. And these are like, I don't want to make fun of people who are friends of mine, but it sometimes gets on my nerves. Well, which people are you talking about? Because there's a lot of people and sometimes they have views that cannot be reconciled. So what is your process? How do you navigate that? Because I know it's important to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's really funny. I mean, to talk about the diversity of views, especially across our ward. And I've talked to voters about that. Our ward stretches from Whittier all the way down to East Harriet. And that can be a wide spectrum at times. And, I try to, again, boil things back up to like, where do we agree? We agree that we want a fair economy, that we want to value diversity and equity and move our city forward on sustainability. And so if we can build trust at that level, that's really where I try to start. And at the end of the day, I know I'm not going to get everyone when we come down to the strategies that we're going to implement. But I hope what I try, what I'm able to accomplish is that people know where my North Star is, and that we're trying to bring as many people together with me as we're moving in that direction, and knowing that just given the dynamics of how many people we're able to bring together, maybe moving at a more incremental pace than I want to or that you want to. But I'm always going to be continuing to push that as much as we can, because my goal is always forward progress. And I'm going to do whatever I can to find a strategy that will make forward progress. And I think, I've talked about the Mueller basketball courts before. Your listeners are probably familiar if they've read your blog, that Mueller Park has a half court basketball court. 20 years ago, it used to have a full court, but because crime was attributed to people playing basketball, because crime was higher in the 90s, then they
racism. That's racism.
Yes, just blatant. And so when I was on this master planning committee for the parks, there was an opportunity to address that. And, this is just one piece of institutional racism in our city, but we were able to actually change the master plan so that now, so that when there's funding available for Mueller Park, that will expand to a full court basketball court. So that's, that is incremental progress. And it's only going to be a middle school size basketball court. And I'm kind of disappointed in that, because I still, that's not, I think, to the level that, the basketball players are really wanting, but it's progress. And so that's what I'm going to continue to push for. And I'd rather deliver some progress than no progress, because I don't think we win if we're doing that. We need to continue to move that Overton window and to show people what's possible.
So the danger of being so willing to talk to the other side is that, and I've seen this happen, you will burn yourself out talking to people who are just destined to hate your guts anyway. That's the flip side. But
this is a true statement. Yep.
And you probably have enough scars to avoid that. Maybe, I don't know. You're not as young and naive as you used to be.
Yeah, I kind of know who it's worth having conversations with, and who's willing to actually problem solve. Those are like some of my absolute favorite people that, we may not, begin with the same strategies, but we're both willing to be open and to listen and to, ideate about how we can, to find a way to move forward. And that's ultimately what happened in Mueller Park. The ultimate pushback was, could we keep the tree canopy given a full court basketball court? And found, a neighbor who was willing to think about how we could reorient this court to make sure that it fit. And so we were checking as many boxes for as many people in that process as possible. And yeah, there are definitely a whole lot of frustrating people. And at the end of the day, a council person needs to be willing to listen and listen respectfully. But, I'm going to want to work with people who are willing to work with me, right? Willing to problem solve, because I'm going to continue to push forward, and I need people on board to help me do that.
Let's talk about rent control.
Mm-hmm.
So there are market urbanist types who get really agitated by this conversation. It's like, just build more housing. And I'm like, yeah, let's build more housing. Nobody believes in that more than me. Nobody's taken more slings and arrows for supporting that than I have. But it's one piece of a housing policy, making a housing market that works. And it's true that a place that it was entirely dependent on rent control to create affordable housing would just be a failed housing market. But it's also true that things like renter protections, things like rent control can keep people, individuals in their homes who otherwise would lose them. So where are you on rent control?
Yeah. So, well, first, there's going to be an amendment, or sorry, a ballot measure.
Thank you for explaining that.
To allow the city to even have a conversation about rent control, because right now there is a state preemption from cities being able to even talk about this. So we first have to have that approved by voters. So I am in favor of that. I am strongly against the state preventing the city from deciding on its own policies. So that is first and foremost. We need to vote yes on that. And when it comes to rent control, I come back to, we need to make sure we're building enough housing. And that's the first part. But secondly, we don't want our neighbors displaced. And rent control is a tool to be able to do that. The way that I think there's a lot of nuance here, and given that, there have been some bad consequences in New York and in San Francisco, that have prevented prevented some movement at all, because people are like, well, I don't want to move because then I lose my rent stabilized apartment. And so we need to think about that to make sure that the movement of people, their natural flow and movement of people still happens, that we're still incentivizing building. Because I think that's really my number one priority. If we're not creating enough homes, we'll never be able to keep affordability. But having some type of rent control in place can be a good tool, particularly when it comes to, what I call price gouging. I've heard from a number of folks where, a landlord will do maybe some surface level improvements and then jack up rent hundreds of dollars and displace lots of, all the tenants in the building, more or less. And that I think is despicable. I think I liken it to, when there's an oil crisis and gas stations then take advantage of people by, driving up the cost of a gallon of gas. And so we shouldn't be doing that either. So I think there's a middle ground in being able to continue to expand our housing, and making sure that people are able to stay in their homes, and honestly focusing. So rent control, again, is just one tool. We have so many other tools that we need to be looking at when it comes to, inclusionary zoning, that right now the affordability threshold is at 60% area median income. That we know is not really where the biggest challenge is for affordable housing in our city. It's really at the 30% and lower of area median income. I was actually looking at the Housing Link data just the other day, and it's basically there are 0% of units in Minneapolis are available at that affordability level. So that's where we need to be targeting our subsidy dollars and our programs, and that is another piece. Whereas like the rent stabilization piece is probably more going to target that the higher the 60% affordability threshold, and so that people can stay in their homes is going to be really important.
I lost my train of thought.
We were talking about rent stabilization, and
it's hard. Hosting a podcast is so hard because I have to listen to your answer and think of what I'm going to say next. Although it's probably harder for you because you don't know where I'm going. I actually know where I'm going, and I still lost my train of thought. I think it was about rent control.
Luckily, I talk about these things a lot.
Oh, so the city, I think, is trying to target at 30% AMI already, right? Are we prioritizing that? No? Maybe I listened too much.
My most recent understanding was that it was at 60%. And so I think what's key to me is that we've had inclusionary zoning for a few years now, and with
Oh,
with any of our policies, we need to be reevaluating how well they're working, and adjusting them over time.
Oh, so you were talking about inclusionary zoning. I thought we were talking about affordable housing dollars. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, inclusionary zoning. Sorry.
Although the IZ inclusionary zoning policy does, I think it allows for some like mixing of 30% with some higher percent. Like you could mix 80% AMI with 30% and like come out to a 60% average. Is that not part of the policy?
I would have to look deeper into that.
Okay, I have vague notions that that is the case. Maybe it's not, or maybe that was for something else. I don't know. We're going to leave that unanswered. Go investigate yourself. So last, we've talked a little bit about housing. The 2040 plan was this current term's big fight in 2018 that got passed, and we've seen parking minimums eliminated, some ADU restrictions eased, triplex. We've rezoned the city for triplexes citywide, which turns out didn't bulldoze neighborhoods. It was supposed to. The bread signs promised us that entire neighborhoods would be bulldozed if we legalized triplexes citywide. Didn't happen. What else have we done? The rooming house thing. Rooming houses are legal, but not really, because we restrict them to nonprofits and government run
agencies. Yep.
So what work is left to be done from the 2040 plan? And I know you talked a little bit about this in your previous answer. Where are we going? What does the future hold for housing priorities, either within the 2040 plan or beyond?
So I think part of it is, fixing the SROs so that they don't have to be owned by nonprofits and governmental agencies. But beyond that, I think it's getting into some of the minutia of the requirements for development. I'm going through that process right now. I'm building an accessory dwelling unit behind my triplex, and some of the requirements are just silly. So for example, an ADU, it does not face the street, right? But the front of the building has the same window to wall ratio requirements as the front of my triplex, because, we want our buildings to have some type of, amount of interactivity with the street. The thing to know is that, windows are expensive. And if we're wanting to reduce the cost of building, one way to do that is to relax some of these types of requirements. And so it's getting into some of those details that, it's kind of death by a thousand cuts. If we can reduce some of those cuts, then maybe some of these projects don't die. And then we can incentivize more of them being created, because we've really only had handfuls of ADUs be built. Same thing with triplexes. And it's because we are trying to fit them into this shoebox that doesn't work out economically. Part of it is that, developers want to make a profit on them, and that is a thing all unto itself. But at the end of the day, if we want more development, we need to make it easier. And thinking about setbacks and height and FAR, so a Florida area ratio, are going to be really important, because otherwise it takes so much time just to figure out how to mass a thing that is legal. I can't tell you how much time we spent on that. And it just shouldn't be that hard. Oh, and on that note too, we should take some lessons from other cities like Portland and Seattle. I think Portland has this too, but Seattle, I know, has some pre-approved plans for accessory dwelling units. So that, it's just this list that people can choose from, so that they have an expedited process when they want to build those. And especially if we think of a standard lot and kind of having standard sizes of things, we can hopefully maybe incentivize more of these to be built.
How much would that how much does that save somebody who wants to build an ADU if they just could pull plans off the shelf? How much is that saving you in architect fees or whatever?
Well, yeah, so that's what's interesting, right? Is that most of the time, so an ADU would essentially be a single family home, and those are usually design build that you don't have most single family homes don't have an architect. And yeah, if you can, but if you're needing to take so much time in order to mass it and put it on there, then you do need an architect. So basically, if you can cut out the architect, you can cut out 10, 20 percent of your cost. And that, I have friends who are architects and I love them dearly. But it's a delicate balance of how do we make sure that we're incentivizing more of this.
Architects are a pain in the ass. I know architects too. There are some good architects, but there are a lot of the worst people in the world are architects. That's what I've learned watching planning commission meetings. Put an architect on the planning commission, you're asking for trouble.
Well, I will just speak from my own experience. We have a fantastic architect who is totally focused on sustainability and equity and how she's doing her business. And, it's also a women-owned architecture firm. So I will just toot her horn, Precipitate Architecture. Good stuff.
Plugs. Let's talk about transportation. I think
love talking transportation.
If we have a dark-haired bike lady in the 2021 election, you are the dark-haired bike lady, for better or worse. For worse, a lot of times you're probably getting a lot of hate for being the dark-haired bike lady. But let's talk about transportation. Do we want to talk about Hennepin Avenue, Lyndale Avenue, all of the above? What are we doing going forward on transportation? Can I trust you to give me bus lanes? Can I trust 100%. You to make Ward 10 safe to cross the street? Can I trust you on these things? Convince me we can trust you.
Well, I have put in so much of my personal time, even while running a campaign, building a house, and working full time to support Hennepin for People. So I've been on the advisory committee for Hennepin Avenue, while I've sat on the infrastructure committee called CLIC. I made sure to write comments that we would have this committee. So we were making sure that we were having good engagement and making sure we were especially reaching renters because they are often left out of these conversations. At the end of the day, Hennepin Avenue needs to follow our transportation action plan, which is prioritizing walking, biking, rolling, and taking transit. And on one of the most critical corridors in our city, we have such an opportunity to really set the stage for how we build going forward. This will be the first major road that will be reconstructed after the Transportation Action Plan. And we desperately need a dedicated bus lanes for the BRT that we now have full funding for, both federal funding and state funding. Thank you to, Representative Hornstein and Long and Dibble for pushing so hard on that. We have great representatives who have been pushing for that funding. So let's use that great funding and make sure we're optimizing optimizing how many people we can get through our corridor and reach our businesses that are along Hennepin Avenue. And buses are the most efficient way to do that. So again, coming back to engineering and efficiency, that's what I like to see. And Hennepin Avenue is a great opportunity there. Besides that, Hennepin Avenue has 3 of the highest or most dangerous intersections in our city, according to the pedestrian safety study. And so it's a really important that we reduce the crossing distances here. We reduce speeds here. And I think having a dedicated bus lane will help that. And having a dedicated bike lane. So in option 1 that was put forth, several months ago from Public Works, there was an option for a cycle track going bidirectional on the eastern side of Hennepin Avenue. Again, having that will shorten the crossing distances for pedestrians moving into fast-moving traffic. And then it would bring car lanes down to 1 car lane in either direction, also with left turn lanes. We know from our experience on Lyndale, south of 31st, that type of setup works really well for moving people efficiently. Instead of, having 2 lanes where there's always constantly someone trying to turn left and that backing up traffic, having dedicated space for every type of mode and use is really effective for moving people to their destinations. And ultimately, that's what we want roads for, is for movement of people, not storage of personal things. So I know there's been a lot of conversation about parking, and that with both of the proposed option 1 and option 2, there would be a reduction on-street parking. That does not mean that there is an insufficient amount of parking in the area in Uptown. And again, we need to look at data. And I think there's been often a misrepresentation about how much parking would be still available in our area. And also just think about, what is our vision for Hennepin and for Uptown? I want to make sure that these corridors and these businesses are serving the area residents first. And as we've added more residents and more units, I think there's just more customers for these businesses to serve. And I've been talking to lots and lots of businesses along Hennepin, Lynn Lake, Eat Street. And what is interesting to me, particularly my conversation with the newer owners of 7 Points, is they bought that building because of the built-in customer base. They are really focusing on trying to serve the customers in this area and not try to make this, the next, 50th in France or the next Southdale Mall. They're not trying to bring more people in because there's already people here. Let's make sure that we're serving people locally. And that's, really what it gets to the heart of this, 15-minute city that I have a vision for, and that is exploding throughout the world in terms of building cities so that people can live locally and have their needs addressed locally. I think one of the best examples most recently because of the pandemic has been Paris. And I know people are like, oh, that's Europe. They just do things different there. But why does it have to be different? We can create the change that we want to see. And so that starts here in Uptown because we already have the density. We already have that built-in customer base. So let's take advantage of that.
But where will I park, Katie Jones? Where will I park?
Well, you don't own a car.
That's true. But like me, metaphorical Ward 10 voter, where will I park, Katie Jones? You just knocked on my door. You told me all these things about Hennepin Avenue. Mm-hmm. You want to put in a bus lane and a bike path on my Hennepin Avenue? Where am I going to park? You're destroying my way of life.
There are options for people to park. There's off-street parking and a number are actually basically on every block. And I think there are ways that the city can help people navigate to that area parking if they so choose to get there that way. And I think there are ways that we can change kind of the flow of some of the triangles, I guess is what I call them. So, Hennepin is at an angle, and there are streets like Colfax and DuPont and Emerson that come at these strange angles. Mm-hmm. And right now, all of the roads, basically, they shoot out onto Hennepin and allow people to turn right, more or less. What if people were allowed to, it's no longer one ways, but people are allowed to go back the other direction. So if they've passed a business, I wanted to go, eat at Renata, they can take a quick right turn, and then there's parking available on that street. So, having people walk a block, I don't think is too much to ask. And I think it's especially interesting if you think about it in the way of how people get around suburbs. So if they go to the mall and they want to, eat at the mall at the Cheesecake Factory or something, they're willing to walk 200 yards, 400 yards, a half mile from where they've parked in order to get to their destination. I think we just need to change our mindset of how far we're willing to walk here in Uptown if we're choosing to drive.
There's all that beautiful scenery at the mall. There's like the pretzel stand and the dollar store. People are willing to walk so far in the mall because there's all that beautiful scenery.
Well, we have much better scenery here in Uptown.
Okay, you don't
we've actually got trees, and we've got interesting architecture, and we have art pieces, as well as the beautiful shops and restaurants throughout the ward. So
That was the premise of my joke. See, you don't appreciate my sense of humor. That was the whole you're explaining my joke.
I'm sorry. That's just how I operate.
So something I've learned paying attention to politics for, the time I've lived in Minneapolis since 2012 is that predictions of doom don't often pan out. I mentioned the apocalyptic red yard signs saying, whole neighborhoods would be demolished if the 2040 plan passed. I remember the big bike lane. Can you imagine this? The big issue of 2017 in Ward 10 was the 26th and 28th Street bike lanes, where people showed up with signs calling them Nazi lanes. They called them mafia lanes. The former Ward 10 council member, Meg Tuthill, showed up. So I've lived through a lot of things where people have said, this is just going to destroy the neighborhood. It's going to destroy the city. And it doesn't pan out. Turns out that change, even radical change, comes so slowly. And so, I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot this year as people predict doom and gloom over the Public Safety Charter Amendment. Yeah, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, again, people are they're scared of change. And I think what we need to be focusing on, again, is like, where do we want to go? and what is it actually going to take to get there? And keeping what we have now is not going to get us there. So I think the doom and gloom is a bunch of hyperbole. We need to be thoughtful in how we move forward on this, for sure. We should be thinking about, different cases and scenarios, and doing as much planning as we possibly can. We're not going to get everything, but the city is not going to collapse because of it. Minneapolis is still a destination for people to move to. I can tell you, I've got friends who have been trying to buy houses, and it's still really, really hard to find a place. So people still want to move here, and I don't see that changing.
Yeah, me neither. But sorry to close out the show on a downer, but 2020 could happen all over again. It could happen all over again. It will happen all over again. Police killings happen with some regularity.
But I think we're building resilience, right? I think the number of, as much bad that happened in 2020, there was actually also a lot of good, with communities coming together and mutual aid, and even, seeing how our local neighborhood organization, Lena, has developed a stronger structure in order to support people who are in need, with the food share and so many other things. I will be an eternal optimist for our city, and especially Ward 10, just because I've talked to so many folks around the ward, and the vast majority of them are hopeful and are excited about continuing to invest their time and effort and energy into making this a better place. And so I think that if we can weather 2020, we can weather pretty much anything.
Well, I will continue to be worried about rolling up on May 2022 and the police have killed someone else, and people will be like, well, at least we held on to our chief. That's the solace. But I'm going to cut that conversation off. That goes to a dark place. Let us end the show. First of all, did I miss anything, Katie Jones? Anything you want to hit on?
We didn't talk about climate change.
Okay. Well, I don't have a climate change question. I think of housing and transportation as climate issues, and I know you have a broader perspective. So run with your climate change agenda.
Well, I think it's, as you're saying, housing and transportation are such key points to addressing climate. Density lowers our carbon footprint per capita. Making sure that we have active transportation options also lowers our carbon footprint. The thing that is kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to energy when it comes to climate change is energy. So we're in a northern climate. We use a lot of energy, especially for heating. I've calculated the city's greenhouse gas emissions inventory when I was in the sustainability office, so that it's, that's more than 50% of our pie. And that's going to take a lot. We have 100,000 buildings in this city that need to decarbonize. That's just how it is. And, I've done that on my own triplex. We've electrified our heating, and not without problems. This is something that we need to be piloting more, and the city needs to be investing in pilots to understand how we can decarbonize in different types of buildings, from bungalows to quadplexes to bigger apartment buildings and condos. There are going to be different strategies that we're going to need to employ, and especially with different vintages of buildings, because any building built before 1980 likely doesn't have any insulation. So that's a major problem in order for us to electrify our heating. So that's really where I want to focus when it comes to sustainability, is doing those pilots and taking lessons learned so that we can scale them up as quickly as we possibly can. We have some good precedents with the MAC program, which is basically provides sound mitigation for homes that are in the path of the airport. And so honestly, sound mitigation is really a lot of energy efficiency work. So we can take lessons learned from that and apply it going forward too. But this is going to be a really big piece of how we meet our climate and carbon goals.
You know how I can tell you know a lot about that subject is my ears glazed over during that whole answer. I'm sorry.
Thanks, John.
No, you're very knowledgeable about that stuff.
And we need to have someone on council who's actually pushing it. And it can't just be, we need to set better goal. We need 100% renewable by 2030, or someone. We have to have someone on council who actually knows how to get there, because setting the goal is not enough.
Yeah, you could say that about a lot of things. I mean, casting votes is one thing, and it's great to have people who are all on the same page about casting the right vote and being in the right coalition and stuff like that. But it never even comes up for a vote if you don't have someone who prioritizes it, who knows the levers to pull and push to get it on an agenda, to get it to the point where it's on an agenda so people can actually vote on it. Mm-hmm. So that's a very important point to make about the city council.
100%. And I'm going to, take my experience working at the city and serving on a bunch of advisory committees to actually bring that kind of implementation mindset. What are the policies that we need in order to actually make action happen?
Can you believe we've talked for 70 minutes? That's
insane. I also can't imagine that someone really wants to listen.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Talk for 70 minutes.
Yeah. Was anyone asking for a podcast with 70-minute conversations with anyone? No one was asking for this. I feel guilty about making people come on here for so long. They just keep going. It feels fine in the moment. I don't know how it feels to people listening. It's been fine. Right?
I honestly haven't had a lot of time to listen to podcasts recently.
Yeah. Well,
so I wouldn't know.
Block out 70-minute blocks of time on your calendar for the Wedge Live podcast. We're talking to everybody. So this is the final question. I've started asking it regularly. Recommend some things to the audience. Not necessarily books. I know a lot of people do the book question, recommend books. Nobody listens to this podcast reads books. So just experiences, like a favorite place to take a walk, a movie, a game, whatever you're into lately that you can find time for that makes you happy, that maybe somebody else would enjoy, maybe it would cheer them up during this terrible crime-themed election year.
Yeah. Well, the thing that immediately came to my mind was the Granada. So the theater / restaurant / bar that is located on Hennepin between Lake and 31st. I think is a new gem in Ward 10. And I'm just telling everyone about it, especially people who are down on, our local business scene. And I'm saying, like, you need to, support our small businesses. And this is an excellent new one. I got to hang out there a couple of weeks ago with some friends, including you. And I think it had an excellent ambiance, and I'm telling everyone about it because it's great to be able to eat outside under these really cool lighting marquee lights and have space between us and traffic, and have slower moving traffic and only one lane in each direction. I think if people were to experience that more, they would come to appreciate that and want it in more places, including along north of Lake Street.
Anything else making you happy? What are you enjoying?
What am I enjoying? I honestly like door knocking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why?
I'm
Who
sorry,
likes
it's
door
probably
Who likes
kinda
door
lame.
knocking? That's so sad.
Yeah. What else am I enjoying lately?
What do you enjoy about door knocking? I find that to be just the most intimidating. Like, I'm coming to your, so annoying too. Like, I'm coming to your house and you got to talk to me. Like, how do you have the guts to do that just over and over again? This goes for any candidate. Campaign volunteers. Got a lot of respect for campaign volunteers who are out there door knocking just day after day, like infringing on people's home lives, inserting themselves into somebody's house or apartment.
Well, I think it's a different framing of, if you're
I
a
like
voter,
I like my framing better, but go ahead.
I think of it as, if you're a voter, I'm making your research easier, right? It's way faster to have a quick conversation with someone than it is to have to find their website and first remember that an election's happening and I should probably do something and I should probably research who the candidates are. Well, I am taking that piece off of their to-do list and going ahead and checking it off for them. And again, 98% of people are really friendly. And I honestly just I asked those two questions for a reason. The hearing what people like about our neighborhood is it's really energizing, and it reinforces why I like living here. And there are concerns for our city. There's going to be concerns anywhere you live. And so I think just having so many people reinforce that, the accessibility, the walkability, the great, restaurants and bars and lakes that we have around here, it just makes me feel good about being where we are.
I'm going to force you to come up with a third thing that you're enjoying. What are you consuming? What do you watching? You watching anything?
Oh, Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso. I haven't watched that. What's so
I'm
good about
so
that?
on the Ted Lasso train. And you want to know why? Because it's about character growth. It's not necessary. I mean, there's always going to be drama in any type of show because otherwise there's not a story, right? But it's really about building people up. And I think especially after the last 18 months, we need more of that, where we see someone who is believing in his players and his players, believing in one another. And so he's a coach. I don't know if you know the premise at all.
Go ahead. Explain the premise. We have listeners.
Okay, so
this is not just the two of us.
True.
We have listeners.
So the premise is that there's this football coach from the United States who moves over to England to coach a really bad soccer team. And at first I didn't want to watch it because I'm not really into a whole bunch of sports type TV and movies, but it's really more about the people and the owner of the club and the players and, the relationships that people are in, both inside and outside the club, and, the struggles that people go through and how they are ultimately, at the end of most episodes, there's some type of support that is being rendered. And it's in a very, sometimes it's cliche, but in other times it's no, this feels very real. And it's not just people trying to tear one another down, which I feel, especially with all of the reality TV and a number of other dramas, that's just the focus. And I think we need to be, especially after the last 18 months, we need to be doing more rebuilding. And that's what I think I get out of Ted Lasso.
Okay. Well, Thank you, Katie Jones, for sharing some of your recommendations with us. So we're at the end of the episode. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
My guest has been Katie Jones, who is running for Minneapolis City Council in Ward 10. She's on the ballot this November. I am your host, John Edwards. Oh, did I mispronounce my own name? I'll cut that out of the show. Or maybe I'll leave it in. I'm your host, John Edwards. This has been the Wedge Live podcast, and thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.